In the final years of World War II, the Nazis faced an enemy they could never shoot, track, or understand. An entire American army that didn't exist. Tanks made of rubber, soldiers who were artists, and a deception so daring it turned the tide of war.
As the Second World War entered its final, punishing phase, the European battlefield transformed into a landscape defined by exhaustion and uncertainty. By late 1944, the German war machine was collapsing under the weight of sustained Allied offensives, fuel shortages, and dwindling manpower. Yet despite the crumbling facade of Nazi strength, the Wehrmacht remained dangerous, capable of sudden counterattacks that could delay or derail the Allied advance. Every decision, every troop movement carried consequences measured in thousands of lives. Across France, Belgium, and the Low Countries, Allied forces pushed eastward toward the German border, but progress was uneven. Supply lines stretched thin. Fog and winter weather obscured visibility. Intelligence was imperfect. And as American and British divisions navigated ruined towns and dense forests, their commanders faced a constant threat. German reconnaissance aircraft and radio intercept units watched every movement, ready to exploit any sign of weakness. It was in this tense environment that something unusual began to appear on German intelligence reports. An American armored division moving with unexpected speed, appearing at river crossings, road junctions, and forest clearings where no such division should have been. Luftwaffe pilots reported long rows of tanks positioned near the front lines. Ground scouts described motor pools, command posts, and supply dumps that seemed to materialize overnight. Radio signals suggested the presence of experienced officers issuing detailed operational orders.
But the movements didn't make sense. Some divisions appeared to be in two places at once. Others seemed to vanish entirely. German analysts, accustomed to deciphering Allied patterns, struggled to reconcile what they were seeing. Photographs from reconnaissance flights revealed armored columns that looked precise from a distance, but curiously light on shadows. Tire tracks appeared where no engines had passed. Command tents stood proudly in open terrain, yet left no signs of prolonged occupation. Reports became so contradictory that some German officers suspected the Allies were attempting large-scale misdirection. Others argued that the intelligence must be faulty, the photographs misinterpreted, the radio intercepts scrambled. But the sightings persisted, and the uncertainty began to shape German decision-making. Units were diverted toward positions believed to be threatened by American advances that were, in reality, never coming. Defensive resources were stretched thinner at a moment when the Reich could least afford mistakes. American soldiers in nearby divisions noticed the strange activity as well. Trucks painted with fresh insignia rolled past them, only to disappear days later. Tanks moved under cover of night, guarded by soldiers who kept an unusual distance from other units. Rumors spread through the ranks of a special division that seemed to operate independently, following orders no one else had access to. Yet even within Allied command structures, few knew what they were witnessing. Only a small circle of officers understood the purpose behind these appearances and disappearances.
As the winter deepened and the Ardennes offensive loomed, this mysterious formation continued to shift across the map, its presence recorded in both German and Allied logs with increasing confusion. A division that appeared formidable on paper, yet left little trace of its passage. A force that moved boldly along threatened sectors, yet engaged in no direct combat. The question lingered on both sides of the front. Who were these soldiers? And how could a single division appear so real, so organized, and yet remain seemingly untouchable in the chaos of war?
The idea that would eventually become the Ghost Army began not on the battlefield, but in military planning rooms where Allied strategists confronted a growing reality. Defeating Nazi Germany required more than strength. It required deception. By 1943, the success of British operations such as Operation Bodyguard and its sub-operations, including the construction of dummy airfields, inflatable aircraft, and false radio networks, demonstrated that carefully designed illusions could redirect German forces as effectively as real divisions. These achievements did not go unnoticed in Washington. American officers studying British methods recognized the strategic value of psychological warfare, especially as the United States prepared for sustained operations across Western Europe. Within the U.S. Army, the concept of visual and sonic deception was championed by the newly formed 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, created under the direction of the Army's Operations and Plans Division. The idea was unconventional. A small, specialized unit that could impersonate entire corps-level formations. Instead of relying solely on armored strength, this formation would manipulate German intelligence systems, photographic reconnaissance, radio intercepts, and human observation by presenting convincing illusions of massed American firepower. This would create uncertainty about Allied intentions at critical moments.
Turning such a vision into reality demanded expertise that the Army did not possess in its traditional ranks. Recruitment therefore extended into unexpected places. The Army turned to the Industrial Design Program at the University of Pennsylvania, to the advertising departments of major American companies, and to the art programs of colleges across the East Coast. Students and graduates from institutions such as Cooper Union, Pratt Institute, and the Cleveland Institute of Art found themselves drafted not only to fight, but to design. Men who had studied painting, illustration, theater staging, and engineering were selected for their ability to construct illusions on a large scale. Their skill sets were remarkably diverse. Some were trained in set design and understood how to create visual structures that held up to distant observation. Others had experience with commercial display work, capable of building large, lightweight models that looked convincing in photographs. Radio technicians joined to generate deceptive signals. Sound engineers, many of them from civilian recording studios, contributed their knowledge to develop mobile audio equipment capable of projecting the sounds of tanks, trucks, and artillery across open terrain.
Inside the Pentagon, the proposal was initially met with hesitation. Senior officers questioned whether the Germans could truly be misled by inflatable tanks or fabricated motor pools. Concerns were raised about the security risks of deploying such a unit near active front lines and whether its highly specialized soldiers could be protected if discovered. Psychological warfare, though recognized as an emerging field, remained controversial. Traditional military culture placed its faith in artillery and infantry, not theater craft. Despite the skepticism, the pressing need for innovative tactics prevailed. Intelligence reports showed the German commanders increasingly depended on reconnaissance to compensate for shrinking resources. A deception unit that could distort that intelligence offered measurable strategic value. In January 1944, the plan received formal approval. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was authorized as a unique experiment in battlefield deception, combining camouflage engineers, signal specialists, and the newly formed sonic and visual units into a single, flexible force. What began as an improbable concept, an army built from art schools and recording studios, was now an official component of the U.S. military. The stage was set for one of the most unusual operations of the war, a fighting force constructed not to destroy, but to deceive.
The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was unlike any other unit formed during the Second World War. At a time when armies were built from infantrymen, engineers, and armored divisions, this unit drew its strength from an entirely different pool of Americans. Painters, illustrators, architects, sound engineers, ad designers, and students pulled straight from the art schools of New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Many of them had never imagined themselves wearing a uniform, let alone participating in a conflict that spanned continents. Yet by 1944, they found themselves on transport ships heading for a war zone, carrying not rifles and grenades, but sketchbooks, compressors, signal equipment, and rolls of rubber-coated fabric. A significant number came from the Philadelphia Museum School of Industrial Art and Cooper Union, institutions known for training designers and commercial artists. Some had worked in advertising firms, producing illustrations for magazines and department stores. Others had backgrounds in theater set construction or radio production. Their portfolios, rather than their marksmanship, were what caught the attention of military recruiters searching for individuals capable of building illusions convincing enough to mislead enemy intelligence. The unit's roster included names that would later become prominent in the post-war art world. Bill Bloss, who would rise to international fame as a fashion designer, served as part of the camouflage section. Ellsworth Kelly, who would become one of the defining abstract painters of the 20th century, was a young soldier responsible for measuring and painting deceptive patterns. Art Kane, later known as a groundbreaking photographer, spent his wartime days studying how shadows and shapes could distort the appearance of vehicles under reconnaissance aircraft. Training for these men did not resemble traditional military instruction. At Fort Meade and Pine Camp, they learned how to inflate rubber tanks, weld decoy artillery frames, and paint entire motor pools of dummy vehicles that had to withstand weather, transport, and scrutiny from German scouts. They practiced arranging fake command posts, complete with realistic tire tracks, hastily built tents, and radio antennas designed to look functional, but transmitting nothing. Engineers taught them how to operate massive 500-pound loudspeakers capable of projecting recorded troop movements across miles of countryside. In some sessions, they spent hours studying how real divisions set up their camps, where they parked their trucks, how they organized mess stations, how they stacked ammunition crates, details that needed to be imitated precisely. Their work required technical precision, but the psychological stakes were equally high. A mistake did not just mean a failed art project, it could expose thousands of Allied troops approaching the front lines. Many of these artists struggled with the weight of their new responsibilities. They were tasked with simulating the presence of entire divisions, knowing that German commanders might shift artillery, armor, or infantry in response to their creations. Their deceptions were crafted not for museum visitors or theater audiences, but for an enemy trained to scrutinize terrain for inconsistencies. Despite their unconventional backgrounds, these soldiers adapted quickly. They embraced the idea that creativity itself could become a weapon. In a war dominated by firepower and technology, they represented a different kind of force, one that relied on imagination, precision, and the ability to manipulate perception. These artists had not come to Europe to kill, they had come to mislead, to distort, and to reshape the battlefield through ingenuity. Their mission would become one of the most unusual contributions to the entire Allied campaign.
The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops arrived in France shortly after the Allied breakthrough from Normandy. The battlefront was fluid, shifting rapidly across northern France as German forces attempted to regroup following the collapse of their defensive lines. For the Ghost Army, this environment created both opportunity and danger. Their mission depended on mobility, secrecy, and the ability to appear where real divisions were not. Their first major operations began in late June and early July 1944, when they were tasked with simulating elements of the 6th Armored Division to support the advance of Patton's Third Army. The unit operated with minimal protection. They traveled in small convoys of jeeps, trucks, and supply vehicles, often entering newly liberated towns only hours after German forces had withdrawn. Their equipment included dozens of inflatable Sherman tanks, rubber artillery positioned on lightweight frames, and carefully crafted dummies of command posts. During the day, engineers reconnoitered suitable landing grounds and road networks to position their decoys. At night, crews fanned out across fields and hedgerows, inflating tank hulls using portable compressors. From a distance, under the lens of German aerial reconnaissance, these decoys had to resemble armored formations preparing for an assault. Sound technicians played a central role in these early operations. Using the 500-pound wire recording playback units developed jointly with Bell Labs, they projected the audio signatures of armored columns, engineering battalions, or truck convoys, depending on the deception plan. The recordings had been captured in the United States, using real tanks and half-tracks to create layered, authentic noise. In France, these soundscapes were amplified across the countryside, sometimes carrying more than 15 miles. The intention was to convince German scouts that a major buildup of American forces was underway.
Working so close to the front exposed the unit to a constant threat of discovery. Several times, German patrols approached their positions unexpectedly. In one early incident near the town of Nautier, members of the 603rd Camouflage Engineers were inflating tank decoys when a German reconnaissance unit moved toward their field. The soldiers extinguished their lights, abandoned half-inflated vehicles, and took cover among hedgerows. The patrol passed without realizing it had walked within yards of a fabricated armored column. Throughout the campaign, incidents like this underscored how narrow the margin of safety truly was. Secrecy was absolute. Even nearby Allied forces were kept unaware of the true nature of the 23rd's work. To maintain the deception, the unit adopted the markings and radio signatures of real divisions. Soldiers wore shoulder patches corresponding to whichever unit they were impersonating at the time. They crafted false radio traffic, complete with coded messages and routine chatter, to simulate an active headquarters communicating with corps-level command. The complexity of these illusions ensured that even experienced American officers occasionally mistook them for genuine combat units. Living conditions were harsh. The men often slept beside their decoys, moving camp frequently to match the shifting strategic needs of the front. They dealt with mud, unpredictable weather, and the constant uncertainty of whether German artillery might target the positions they had created. Their mission required them to operate close enough to enemy lines to be believable, yet distant enough to avoid direct engagement. Any capture would risk exposing the entire deception apparatus, potentially undermining dozens of ongoing Allied operations. By the end of their first deployments in France, the Ghost Army had carried out multiple tactical deceptions that redirected German reconnaissance and contributed to the rapid Allied advance. Their operations proved that illusions, carefully engineered, expertly executed, and concealed in secrecy, could shape the battlefield as decisively as physical force.
From the closing months of the Second World War emerged one of its most extraordinary and little-known chapters. A war fought not with bullets or bombs, but with sound and illusion. The weapon was deception. The unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, known as the Ghost Army. Technical specialists within the unit focused on a new form of warfare, sonic manipulation. They recorded the sounds of battle in painstaking detail, tanks rumbling, engines throttling, metal tracks grinding over earth, trucks clattering along roads, and the march of infantry in formation. Even shouted commands and the clatter of supplies were captured, every sound a tool to recreate the chaos of a full-scale army. Once deployed in Europe, these recordings were transformed into instruments of war. Mounted on half-track vehicles equipped with enormous speakers, the Ghost Army could project these soundscapes across miles. Coupled with inflatable tanks, rubber jeeps, and decoy artillery carefully arranged in fields and forests, the sound trucks turned the quiet countryside into a convincing illusion of a massive advancing force. Engines roared, tracks clanked, boots marched, orders rang out, and the distant rumble of construction created the impression of an entire division on the move. The Germans, deceived by both sight and sound, believed they faced forces far larger than reality. Fake radio chatter and broadcasting reinforced the illusion, making it nearly impossible for enemy reconnaissance to distinguish real units from phantoms. In some operations, a unit of several hundred men could simulate the presence of thousands.
One notable success came in March 1945, during preparations for the Allied crossing of the Rhine. The Ghost Army deployed hundreds of inflatable vehicles and projected full soundscapes of troops and equipment moving into position, complete with pontoon bridge construction. German forces, convinced a major assault was imminent at that location, diverted soldiers and resources, leaving the real crossing point less defended. The deception directly facilitated the success of the Allied advance with minimal resistance. Across more than 20 missions in 1944 and 1945, the Ghost Army demonstrated the power of sound as a weapon. Meticulously recorded battle noises sowed confusion, fear, and hesitation among German commanders, forcing them to misjudge Allied strength and intentions. On the sonic battlefield, silence did not signal safety, it was weaponized. The roar of engines, the march of troops, and the clash of metal became instruments of strategy. Through these invisible yet tangible forces, the Ghost Army transformed sound into a decisive tool, proving that the mind of the enemy could be manipulated as effectively as the terrain itself.